Now we're going to be looking at a different example in scenario 2. So here we have the scenario of two different performers, Rachel and Sarah. Sarah, the goal shooter in the netball squad, just seems to fail. She has a 32% scoring average in the league games against Lewis and Varndine, yet in training sessions and other local games her scoring average is 86%. The colleges often schedule these crunch games to the end of the season when many spectators can watch. Interestingly, some of the other players in Sarah's team, such as the centre Rachel, have not been very supportive and don't understand or accept Sarah's poor performance in the crunch games of the league. Sarah is aware of Rachel's attitude to her. Rachel just seems to thrive on the atmosphere and challenge of the tough games and has received player of the match several times. And we've highlighted some of the key points that we're going to be talking about in this assignment. Firstly, we're going to be looking at Sarah. We can see that Sarah, like Nick, is experiencing high levels of negative distress, which is then causing her performance levels to decrease. This is more evident in the Crunch League games against Lewis and Varndine. One reason for this may be because at these Crunch games, many spectators come to watch, and more people watching her to try and score actually puts more pressure on Sarah to score because there is a desire to win from the spectators but also from the team and the coach, especially if this is the game that's going to determine whether they win the league or not. Also, because Varndine and Lewis are the rival teams, there may be people she knows or is friends with that go to these schools, and therefore this would also put more pressure on her to perform well and impress them, and this may affect her concentration because the spectators may be people also she doesn't get on with who could laugh or make comments at her if she misses a shot. So this could have a knock-on effect and affect her concentration in the shots yet to come, and therefore causing her performance to deteriorate, so she has less confidence in herself and her shooting technique. This distress is the extreme form of anxiety, which is where Sarah perceives herself to have an inability to cope with the demands of the environment. So she sees the crunch games as an atmosphere where she cannot respond positively to the match, which is why her performance is compromised, as each time she has this negative mindset, it increases the distress, leading to increased anxiety and arousal levels. Sarah may also be stressed due to certain stressors. As we mentioned previously, this is how we respond to certain situations impacting our behaviour. One factor is the sporting environment and the way Sarah and her teammates are towards Sarah, and the rest of the team, as we can see in the scenario that Rachel has not been very supportive when Sarah has had a tough game and not performed her best. So this may put added pressure on Sarah to perform on Sarah in the crunch games because Rachel has this desire to win, and she may feel if she doesn't perform well, this may affect her friendship with Rachel and the other players in the team. And the bad performances in this games may actually compromise her position in the first team, which is something she is scared of losing. But more importantly, there is an importance and pressure to win, as a loss in these games may affect the team winning the league, and it seems Rachel and the team would become frustrated when this chance is compromised or lost. And this could be from a loss of possession or a missed shot by Sarah, and they make this clear with comments to people like Sarah who actually are compromising the team's performance. Sarah could also be experiencing external stresses like her real life events to do with her family, relationships, and even school life, which could also impact her performance. It's not just the netball matches there that could be the negative interactions, but her family could also contribute to her performance, especially if they come to watch the games and she has a negative relationship with them, and that she may feel like she has to impress them in order to live up to the expectations if they have high expectations of her. So this results in Sarah experiencing symptoms of stress, particularly cognitive symptoms, which then cause her performance to decrease. This is evident in her making mistakes with her shooting technique and missing her shots due to her reduced concentration, which makes her respond negatively, that compromises her performance, and therefore results in a loss of self-esteem. So every crunch match, she has this negative perception before the match that her scoring won't be as good as in training or normal matches, and this contributes to her becoming too self-critical when receiving this stress, where she then questions her talent, resulting in the rapid deterioration. We can see from Sarah's experience in her games that she is experiencing high levels of anxiety in the netball matches, as she is constantly worrying about her shooting and how her shooting average falls from 86% to 23%. But once the match is over, she doesn't appear to be experiencing any anxiety or to the level that it was, and therefore from this we can conclude that Sarah is showing signs of state anxiety. State anxiety is the concept of feelings that are felt by an individual that occur in the moment and can change depending on the situation and the demand. It is a temporary type of anxiety, unlike trait anxiety, and it's more of an emotional response that is shown to a situation that can be perceived to be threatening, so they are mainly physiological changes that are cognitive or somatic. We can infer from the scenario of Sarah's behaviour that she is experiencing mainly cognitive anxiety, which relates to the idea of the mind and how in the moment, depending on the situation, how we worry and are negative in these changeable situations. McNally 2002 said that cognitive anxiety is due to the negative expectations or concerns that an individual has towards their ability to perform and the possibility of the consequences they will receive from failure. It is the emotional feelings an individual has, so we understand that Sarah is feeling worried leading up to the crunch matches, and this therefore brings about the negative thoughts which form this perception in her head that she will not perform well, as she is basing her thoughts from her previous matches against her rival teams that her scoring will only be an average of 23%, and this then contributes to her poor performance. This is also brought on by stress, so performing in front of lots of spectators and trying to please members of the team as they are not being very supportive and understanding of her anxiety, this then causes her to become overwhelmed with the pressure, and therefore she cannot perform well with the added pressure from the external stresses and the sporting environment. Because Sarah is showing signs of state anxiety, we can understand that this can change from moment to moment, so there may be parts of the game when she is not as anxious and the negative thoughts are suppressed, but when she pays attention to these stresses, they bring about the anxiety when Sarah needs to score. It is not just the personal factors like self-esteem and anxiety with her physique, because in the training sessions and normal games, Sarah seems to perform at her best and seems confident in herself and her talent. But it's more a result of the situational factors like the importance and uncertainty the crunch games bring, with the added pressure of the desire to win. Sarah may feel threatened by the opposition, and how they maybe know she becomes anxious. They use techniques like double marking her out of the game, so maybe the opportunity she would have in previous games are taken away from her, which results in the state anxiety. We could also say that Sarah is demonstrating competitive anxiety, which is when a performer perceives the competitive environments to be a potential threat to them. Hackford and Schwenkesmeger, 1989, proposed that competitive anxiety is a type of competitive state anxiety that usually follows a pattern of subjective feelings where the individual feels tension and an inadequate ability, which is combined with the response of the autonomic nervous system to increase arousal levels. This anxiety can occur before the competition, where Sarah may be demonstrating a fear of making mistakes with her shooting technique because she has a fear of the importance of the crunch matches to her team and her crucial role that she plays. But the anxiety can also occur during the competition, and Sarah's evaluation of others to do with the opposition players or the spectators can actually result in her responding to the wrong cues, which will affect her concentration and distract her from making the accurate shots. We are able to measure anxiety by using questionnaires, and this helps us to see if someone's tendencies to get anxious, how they occur due to their personality, and we can conclude from this whether the person may have high trait anxiety or the state anxiety. It may be more appropriate to look at the individual in the moment so we get more of an accurate perception of what they're feeling at that time, whereas just reflecting on the game, because there's a lot of things that happen in the game and a lot of emotions that can be affected. So by asking them what they're feeling is changing their nature of their experiencing by making them more conscious, so maybe they're thinking more about what they were feeling at the time and not really just elaborating on what they actually felt. So it's not necessarily the most accurate way of measuring. We'd be more accurate in the way that we measure arousal, in that we measure physical changes like blood pressure, muscle tension, pupil dilation, we can actually see these changes. Whereas if we were just relying on someone's feelings and from their own personal view, we cannot conclude this is the most accurate way of determining anxiety, but it's the only accurate way we can really do it at the moment. And here we just have a graph showing the effects of state anxiety on performance. So we can see that if we have low cognitive anxiety, which is represented by the curved line, if we have low levels of anxiety, we actually have a low quality of performance because we're sort of under aroused, we're not feeling anxious, we're not really aware of our surroundings. And this increases to a certain optimal point of the athlete where their performance is high, they're performing at their best with moderate levels of anxiety. But when this anxiety reaches a certain point and it becomes too high, they become too anxious, it results in the quality of their performance deteriorating gradually to a low performance. And we can see that so that was somatic state anxiety. With the straight line, we can see cognitive state anxiety, and this is quite a sort of linear relationship. If we have high levels of anxiety, we have low levels of performance, and if we have low levels of cognitive state anxiety, we have high levels of performance. And it really depends on the individual and how it affects their performance. We can notice from Sarah's performance in the decrease of her shooting average that she is suffering from high levels of arousal. According to Weinberg and Gold 2007, arousal is a general physiological and psychological activation which can vary on the continuum from deep sleep to intense excitement. It refers to the level of motivation, alertness and excitement in a particular moment, which is a combination of the physiological and psychological activities that commence. So by explaining how ready the performer is from their drive, can prepare the body for action so we can respond to situations automatically, which therefore changes our level of arousal. When an individual experiences arousal, they can be under-aroused or over-aroused depending on the situation. Both of these types may cause a performer to perform badly, because if you are under-aroused, you may not be ready enough and therefore not be able to react to the situation. As we showed here, low levels of anxiety is also to do with it as well. But if you have too much arousal, your levels are above the optimum, so this may cause you to overthink and overplay because we become too stressed and panic. And we lose control of our performance. Because it is an energised function, it can be affected by hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, which can cause us to react in certain ways. Gill 1986 described it as the intensity dimension of behaviour, which is the degree of emotional energy that is felt in different situations, as it is connected to the state we enter when we are driven to learn and perform well. However, our bodies want to remain in homeostasis, but when we become anxious and stressed, this can change our state by increasing our levels of arousal, so we experience different characteristics that can affect our level of performance negatively. So we want to reduce this. Both the somatic and cognitive symptoms equal arousal, which shows it is to do with our physiological and psychological readiness, so changes to our physical health and how in the moment we think depending on the situation. The reticular activating system, RAS, is responsible for regulating the levels of arousal and our response to our fight or flight responses in how we react to the stimulus, and this is determined by our arousal levels. And this, as we've said, the graph shows that there are different levels of arousal that can affect our performance. It is possible to measure arousal, as we previously mentioned, and we achieve this, unlike other methods, by examining the individual and not using self-reporting techniques to determine the levels of arousal. We conduct examinations of the patients to monitor somatic changes like heart rate, breathing rate, muscle tension, pupil dilation, and even blood samples. It is often talked about in sport that athletes need to be psyched up before their performance, but it is important to understand that different sports require different levels of arousal. So if we compare the scenarios of Nick and Sarah, because badminton requires the performer to make accurate and precise shots, it would be considered to be using fine motor skills, so would require slight levels of arousal, as the athlete would need to focus, whereas Sarah, whose sport netball, does require fine motor skills too, but her position of centre compared to Rachel's goal shooter would be considered a more gross motor skill.